In August, I released a video that I wanted to make as a passion project of sorts, a slight change in content and ultimately a risk. It is an undeniable fact that my long-form Monster Hunter videos do a lot better than average, to say the least, and I wasn't sure whether a more serious documentary-style video was in the cards for me. But seeing the insane amount of comments was astonishing. These ranged massively from some correcting me on slight ecological mistakes I had made, others praising me as a god, as they rightfully should, but a third subset were people that commented with lists of their own. All of these lists were amazing reads, especially the ones that had actually gone through the massive amount of effort to come up with not only one new subspecies, but one for each locale, and best believe I'm in the process of noting down all of these lists, hinting at another video slightly down the pipeline perhaps. A few comments, however, sprouted a curiosity in me. One monster proposal that I made that stood out maybe a bit more than the others was that of the Akura Vishimu, where I detailed its possible place within the Windward Plains. People not only mentioned how they thought that Vishimu was a brilliant pick, but also detailed how other monsters of that same franchise could enter. Monster Hunter Frontier, with its two major updates, Frontier G and Frontier Z, alongside the lesser known Online and Explore, were all Eastern releases, meaning that the Western world outside of private servers and hacking couldn't get their hands on it. The games themselves were MMORPGs, separating themselves as more spin-offs, but nonetheless were great hits, with many players who have managed to get their hands on it outside of Asia praising it. However, all hope for the rest of us getting access died out in December of 2019 when the servers for all of the above games were shut down, cutting off all possible methods of a Frontier game releasing in the West, and therefore its roster of monsters. Interviews have stated that the Frontier side of Monster Hunter would stay its own separate entity, however now that the games have gone, so too has the exclusivity of these monsters. June 30th, 2022, Monster Hunter Rise would get its expansion Sunbreak, alongside plenty of newer monsters, those who hadn't got the next gen treatment yet, and fan favourites. There were a couple that shocked a select few players. Espinasse, the flagship of Frontier and widely regarded as the Rathalos of that sub-series, made its mainline debut, and alongside it came its subspecies, dubbed the Flaming Espinasse. Plenty of the development team who worked on Frontier also worked on Sunbreak, and whilst many of the fanbase saw this as a gentle nod to the series, a reference if you will, I instead think that this was the development team trying to put their foot in the door of merging the two assets, and so I decided to remake the DLC possibility list, except with the condition that all of the picks I make are exclusively monsters from the Frontier franchise. The only exceptions being any monsters featured in the 20th Aniv ranking, being Hypnocatrice, Lavasioth, and the aforementioned Espinasse and Flaming Espinasse, as well as any Zenith monsters, even though they are probably the coolest looking monsters of the whole IP.
But he's so cool! Oh, that's so cool! Oh, oh my god, he's so goddamn cool! How many push-ups did he do? How many sit-ups? What kind of juice did he drink?
Another quick disclaimer before we begin. Again, this is what I think is my best. Being a player who joined in World, I have no experience nor expertise in the Frontier field. I am possibly the least qualified person ever to talk about them. But reading through the monster entries only made me want to experience them more, so I hope I've done them a justice. That being said, there may be some tweaking, retconning, or making some things up to make everything fit, and there is the high likelihood that things I say are just entirely false, so please do forgive me in these instances. Final one, the monsters of Frontier, for the most part, seem to have pretty specific environments for them. For example, Obadatarasu seems pretty gatekept by a desert-centered environment, and for some, if not most of the monsters, I've listed them in certain locales, but that's not to say they're gatekept there like the Guardians or the Apexes. After all, Gypsaros can be found anywhere but the forest, Rathian can be found in the first three locales, and Argveld just goes wherever he wants, so I'll detail any extra locales I feel where necessary. Not to mention I've completely disregarded the potential for another locale to become available and theorized returns specifically for the 5 that we currently have. I have this time come up with 5 monsters to return / debut for each locale instead of 4 monsters in a new variant, just because I wanted to show full tribute to the quality of these monsters without adding anything extra, plus a few siege / boss / title update monsters to scatter throughout. And so with that humongous intro out of the way, let's delve into the vast unknown for some, a walk down memory lane for others, but for all of us, a glimpse of what may be to come. The The Windward Plains remains to be a barren wasteland for the most part, with the sand tide continuing to be a consistent threat to most of the wildlife within. Over the course of the last few months, the Windward Plains has seen plenty of ecological adaptation and environmental shifts, with the radar reaching a new level of arc-tempered power to the Seregios making its appearance and shifting the chain of dominance. The same seems to be true of the sand tide itself, as some Kunafa villagers recount lightning strikes continuing to strike with the same intensity, however also in a much less intense and, for lack of a better term, invisible manner, and sometimes not even in the sand tide. Some villagers tell of walking through the desert and getting a sudden shock from underfoot, but consistent between all of these random, seemingly anthological tales are that the Kunafan villagers recount seeing a large, unidentifiable shadow launching itself to the ground far away, the area the beast landed only having piles of dead herbivores, no monster to be seen. This monster, from what fleeting features the Kunafans had seen of it, was pieced together, and expert ecologists eventually determined responsibility belonged to a flying wyvern with dagger-like teeth, razor-sharp talons, but perhaps more recognizably, whip-like wing fingers, the Berokurosu. The Berokurosu are in their own right apex predators and readily use the thunder element with infused paralysis to attack potential prey, the source of the power being a mineral-filled liquid within its body, that which is corrosive and burns skin on contact. Although that being said, the Berokurosu has yet to gain the upper hand on Radau, whose lightning-wielding power is just a cut above. The Berokurosu, however, is both an offensive and defensive marvel, with its horn conducting, controlling, and stabilizing the large amount of lightning energy coursing through it, as well as the strikes of the sand tide, almost acting as another one of the monolith grounding pillars found present throughout. It can use its wings and tail to decimate opponents near instantly, shoot out a solid beam of electricity very similar to Rajang's. Their unusually high amounts of blood and bone marrow being how they can survive the humongous amounts of lightning coursing through them constantly without incurring serious harm. It chooses to gorge itself on the Ceratinoth the majority of the time, the quill appendages it has sending a large electric shock into the ground, overloading the Ceratinoth and killing them instantly. The fat of the Berokurosu covers all of its vital organs and, alongside the scales of the beast, is extremely resistant to heat, both protecting it from the extreme heat of the desert as well as the tremendous temperatures exhausted from the corrosive liquid. The main attraction of the Berokurosu is its high intelligence. Its prolonged success in fights means it has plenty of experience battling hunters and other monsters, and so will develop and adapt its fighting style based on the weapon they choose to wield. And so to match, it has a ruthless death before dishonor mindset. The skeleton and biological build of the Berokurosu bears an extreme similarity to the Arkveld, a flying wyvern with whip-like appendages on the wings, and so researchers believe it may have learned some attack patterns through its passive observation or Taskmaster-esque battle IQ. Therefore, it will easily slice through most hunters that come up against it. However, if a successful hunter breaks off the horn of the Berokurosu, it is extremely painful and it can no longer stabilize the electricity it produces. This means it will be reckless with its attacks and even harm itself, that which is only intentional when a hunter intends to trap it. In this scenario, it will overload its body with electricity, creating such a large current that it will cause a lightning strike 10 times larger than any sand tide strike and much more ferociously than a Radau railgun strike, killing the monster instantly so that capture doesn't tarnish its stellar fighting record. The Radau may keep its apex title for now, however, as the Berokurosu dances through the sand tide's thunder and strike with ever-growing severe lethality and precision, its intelligence can only keep it gatekept for so long. The only problem is that this may not be the only form of this monster we see in the Forbidden Lands. The desert of the Windward Plains is unforgiving to anything unprepared for its extreme temperatures, the sun reaching temperatures as high as 50 Celsius or around 120 Fahrenheit. Most monsters won't be able to survive without the oasis in Area 13 or the fulgurite cabins in the southern areas providing shade for those needing a break. Some monsters, however, thrive in the sunlight, whether that be specialized adaptations designed to withstand the heat, or a slime layer covering the monster from the rays. However, not a lot of monsters will use the sun itself as an actual means of weaponry. One such monster, the first bird wyvern of the Windward Plains, utilizes the harsh desert rays to frighteningly deadly effect, to the point that some Kunafans now refuse to go out during the day in fear of this monster burning them to a crisp, a monster known by few as the Iceshard Cliffs. The Toriclis loves to reside within regions with plentiful sun, such as the highlands and the gorge, the two regions of frontier that coincidentally are also prone to large lightning storms. They nest mostly within the highest regions of the Fulgurite caverns, venturing down to the plains sub-region during dinner time to feed on the Ceratanoth as a replacement for their normal Apsaros diets, all the while using their brightly covered feathers to absorb all of the harsh sunlight, converting it into electrical energy and using a specialized liquid within their body to, much like the Zinogre, use this electrical energy in its attacks. Its electricity can be used very skillfully in both offense and defense, either jolting predators and prey alike with a sharp, paralyzing shock, or converting said electric energy back into light energy, producing a large solar flare-like flash to blind opponents, in a very similar manner to Tzitzi-Yaku, or more appropriately the Gypsaros. This blinding flash is either used in an effort to escape to safety, or to go in for the killing blow. However, the Toriclis isn't completely useless without its electrical abilities, as the detachable spikes on its wings can be used to snipe any potential prey in a similar manner to the Seregios' scales. However, from a much further range, its talons are long and razor sharp enough to stop it dead in its tracks whilst running, and are even powerful enough to tear through armor with little to no resistance. The Toriclis are highly intelligent creatures, and pick and choose their hunts well. The abundance of Ceratanoth to feed on mean they will rarely be challenged for food, but will still compete with other predators such as the Rathian and Doshiguma. They will hunt when needed, but rarely more than they need to, and will stay well away from Berikiriosu, one of its predatory rivals. Therefore, by extension, it will fear Raidal for its life. However, if hunting something it deems to be below their pay grade, such as a Quematrice or a Chatacabra, they have a tendency to seem slightly arrogant, as some Avis unit field ecologists have dubbed it. It will attack quickly, sometimes too quick for its own good, and will adopt a fighting style which, much like its attempt at camouflage, is probably a bit too colourful to work out well. The Guild and its researchers are in a constant effort to provide more and more information about the ever-expanding roster of monsters, flora, fauna, environment, etc. There is rarely a day where there isn't a theory or discussion that either proves or disproves a specific monster's behavior or a reason for water to change color, for example. These have ranged from as little as the Almadron being theorized to simply be a female Mizetsune, potentially meaning the Mizetsune's fins, fluorescent plumage, and exotic dancing would be a method of attracting a mate, to theories as large and far-fetched as the Plesioth not only being the origin species for most, if not all, piscine wyverns, but also being the de facto most powerful being in the world, as in some scenarios its hip check attack has been seen to actually distort space-time. Most of these theories, however, whilst promising, do eventually get written off as false, and one of these more recent theories involves a monster that was thought to have been evolving to eventually reside exclusively within the water, however makes home in the gorge and the highlands, much like the Toriclis, a monster whose hunger rivals that of the Devil Joe, known to most as the Puria Puria. The Pariapuria are a gluttonous species of flying wyvern. However, those that can be found within the Windward Plains are ecologically different from those found in the gorge or the highlands, if only slightly. Whilst researchers debunked the theory that Pariapuria should have evolved to become a monster exclusively found within water, the Pariapuria in the plains will keep to land and only rarely go into water either to bathe or to drink. It has a very similar skeleton and attack style to Tigrex, but whilst the Tigrex was quick, calculated and lethal, the Pariapuria is instead much larger, much clumsier, and has an appetite even Savage Joe would scoff at. Its body is covered in a layer of slippery mucus that repels adhesives, allowing it to traverse the dunes of the plains easily without constantly being covered in sand, and with its many rows of sharp teeth will rip, tear, and gouge through its prey with little to no effort. It swallows its prey whole and can even use this food in offense, but unless aggravated will slowly wander around the plains with a full stomach in a similar manner that some will recognize from the Great Jagras. Its digestive juices are fast-acting, violent, and very powerful, to the point they will remain long after death, eventually digesting a dead Pariapuria from the inside out. The color of Pariapuria's saliva gives hunters an idea as to what to feed the gluttonous beast, with yellow, purple, and blue saliva indicating an appetite for para meat, poison meat, and sleep meat respectively. Feeding it enough of the right type will cause it to grow slower, more lethargic, and spit up some extra drops for hunters, but feeding it the wrong kind will cause it to erupt in rage, spitting auto-stun sand attacks and elemental blights depending on what meat has been eaten. However, if it hasn't eaten anything in a while, it may spit out the aforementioned digestive juices on their own, causing the defense down debuff as if the digestive juices are melting away a hunter's armor. It may even take the initiative itself, eating up the dead carcasses of monsters, large and small, to gain their elemental effects for a short while. The digestive juices allow it to spit fire element if eating Quematrice meat, poison if eating Rathian meat, and thunder element if eating a male Ceratonoth. But one thing is for certain, if there is nothing available for the Pariapuria to eat while you hunt it, then beware, for you are the main course of this beast's meal. You just don't know it yet. In the world of Monster Hunter Wilds, small monsters are rarely bothered by hunters, but rarely are they spared by wyverns. The Ceratonoth of the plains slaughtered by the Doshiguma, the Gelodron of the basin sliced, diced and served up by all manner of monster, and the Rathma of the cliffs find themselves ganged up on by packs of Blango. There hasn't been much evidence anywhere from the Forbidden Lands to suggest that large monsters coexist fully with smaller monsters, with the exception of the Blangonga and the Congalala hanging out with the juvenile versions of itself. Yes, there is the occasion where a monster may wander by a pack of small monsters and bid them no mind, but eventually predator and prey would assume their roles. There is, however, found to be one such instance from a monster recently discovered to be within the plains. A herd of Ceratonoth settled relaxed, but in the presence of a large flying wyvern. Instead of fleeing from the beast, it instead seems to grant the herd protection, comfort even. It differentiated from the stigma of most large flying wyverns, such as the likes of the Rathalos, Rathian, Arkveld, all feeding near exclusively on meat, but instead fed on insects and plants, and was later recognized to be a Guren Zaburu. The Guren Zaburu, despite its nature around small herbivores, is instead threatening to a deadly degree, being nicknamed the Barbarian Wyvern, and has been documented to be extremely ultra-territorial. The main asset of offense of this wyvern, to many hunters' dismay, is its entire biology. Its body is big enough to act as a battering ram, its wings powerful enough to hold the monster airborne before throwing its entire mass at you, its will strong enough to fight back within pinfall traps and expel paralyzing gas within shock traps. This beast is adapted to hard counter all of the heaviest DPS opportunities hunters of the Forbidden Lands will have. The two most relevant ecological adaptations it has are its tail and its hide. Starting with the latter, the Guren Zaburu has been known to eat minerals, which allows it to develop its quartz-like reinforced shell. However, those found within the plains instead have a much darker navy blue hue to them, as the minerals the Guren Zaburu eats here tend to be exclusively the fulgurites. This also causes crystalline spikes to grow on the Guren Zaburu's other most relevant ecological adaptation, its tail, that which can be flung off and lodged in the ground to act as a mini conductor in stormy weather. Whilst hunting this beast in the sandtide is the most challenging time to hunt, it's also the most challenging time for the Guren Zaburu to be hunted, as whilst the crystalline structures on its back and rubbery skin offer it a large amount of protection from the lightning strikes, it is still just as susceptible to them if lightning from the dislodged spikes happens to strike them. The Guren Zaburu is remarkable at maintaining water within its body. However, those that enrage it in prolonged battle will learn that this water isn't just to keep them alive. The Barbarian Wyvern can also utilize this in offense. It has pores on the underside of its wings and body, similar places to where it will spell the paralyzing gas. However, the extreme heat constantly available in the plains causes superheated steam to engulf all hunters close enough, causing serious damage. The Guren Zaburu, regardless of the weather cycle, is still a formidable beast to fight, with the likes of Doshiguma, Rathia and Quematrice constantly finding itself fell by its hand. The likes of Arkveld and Raydal tend to be a step too far for the Guren Zaburu, but if it considers them a threat, it will use its entire biology to fight them until its last breath, never giving up on the fights easily. The species of Monster Hunter are not just fictional, one-dimensional beings. They are not just monsters based upon real-world inspirations. They are instead thought-out, fleshed-out beings that have absolutely humongous amounts of ideology behind them. For example, the Glabinus doesn't just have a sword tail that stays sharp because, bugger it, it'll be cool as hell. It's a biological adaptation due to a specifically evolved jaw that keeps the tail sharp. The inspiration of Darwinian ideology is heavily evident in all species that reside in Monster hunter to the point that two separate monsters can be connected to a mutual ancestor. The Gombi, Volvodon, and Arzuros are all fanged beasts that can be classified under the suborder Hard Claw, meaning they would all share a common ancestor. However, there are monsters classified under different names that are almost a part of the immediate family of another. The family in question is the Rex family, with notable members being the Tigrex, Molten Tigrex, and Brute Tigrex. There is, however, a long-lost cousin that very few know about, a thunder-roaring wyvern known as the Diarakusu. The Diarakusu is a very aggressive, very dangerous monster to go up against, especially in the Windward Plains. The main adaptation of the Diarakusu from the rest of the Rex family is its ability to hold small amounts of electricity due to it adapting special thunder-producing organs, which it will almost use as a performance enhancer to attack stronger and faster than normal, almost in a similar manner to athletes using electrical muscle stimulation to cause heavier contractions in their muscles to work for harder and faster for longer. The Diarakusu isn't just a one-trick pony though, and the more famed use for this electrical power is instead used more in defense. When threatened, the Diarakusu will venture towards the Fulgurite caves, where this electrical energy can be used to attract the extreme amounts of Fulgurite ore surrounding it, causing it to magnetize to the Diarakusu. This ore will lose its color before being flooded with electrical energy and turning a deep blue to form a sort of battle armor. A heavy armor to be sure, however, due to the previously mentioned electrical stimulation, this doesn't hinder the movement speed or the power of the Diarakusu, to the point it is able to manipulate the Fulgurite around it into a wall of sorts before leaping off them with astounding speeds toward prey, possibly even blasting it with a beam of electrical energy, very similar to the Rajang. Vigilant hunters will notice though that in order for the Diarakusu to continue the onslaught of electrical prowess, it will need to charge its body parts before attacking. This is displayed either in the head, arms, or tail of the Diarakusu by glowing a much brighter, much more blinding blue, and those that will listen well enough will be able to hear these supercharged portions hum with the same chime that keeps predators away from Kunafa. These charged parts are a lot more threatening, but also much weaker, allowing hunters the opportunity to break off the Fulgurite supersuits and show the true pale grey form of the Diarakusu. Whilst the Diarakusu is a massively offensive threat for those who oppose it, anyone that has fought a Rex will know how to fight this one. It has the same bludgeoning arms, the same eviscerating tail, and the same ear-piercing roars, but should never be taken lightly. We have all hunted at least one form of the Tigrex before, but the Diarakusu cares not for family matters. It will continuously throw itself at you with ferocity so severe until either it drops or it paints you against the Fulgurite walls. Walls it will, in time, use to armor itself for yet another fight. The Gravios, a large, lumbering, flying wyvern covered in a hard layer of rock, capable of repelling weapons of even the highest sharpness. It typically resides within the volcanic areas of whatever region it calls home, and is adapted accordingly. It will attack with massive fiery beams and expel massively hot steam, as well as poison and sleep gas out from its underbelly if it feels threatened. The Bizarrios is another monster within this family, being a juvenile Gravios, retaining the basic attacking style yet very clumsy, as it is yet to have fully grown, and the Black Gravios is a more aggressive subspecies capable of expelling explosive gas. However, there is one more member of this family that has been left out of history, nowhere to be seen in guild records or ecological research documents, a Gravios that eventually went extinct due to the locales it resided in being drained of all of its water. But due to the Scarlet Forest seeing a near abundance of the resource, this Gravios seems to have resurfaced. Not a subspecies, nor a variant, nor a deviant. Instead, a more fitting term would be the origin species, the Gureo Dumosu. The Gureo Dumosu is a large water-dwelling flying wyvern, much larger than the Gravios, covered in a weird green-orangey moss. Research believes this moss comes to be through the process of the Gureo Dumosu processing and purifying the water it intakes, creating a sort of symbiotic relationship between it and the forest. Whilst preferring a more humid, desert oasis-centered biome, the Gureo Dumosu has settled itself within the Scarlet Forest due to the oasis found in the Windward Plains being far too small for the Gureo Dumosu to properly enjoy. enjoy. However, that's not to say it won't venture out towards the savanna to enjoy some time in the sun. It resides within the forest, quenching its thirsts and filling its body's storage with a large amount of water. This monster uses an array of large moss-covered tubes to weaponize water, firing concentrated jets or wide volleys at extreme velocity, that which will turn red if fought in the fallow. Another detail that isn't massively important, but again, something that Eric found cool nonetheless. These act either as a cannon or mortar-like weapons for heavy elemental strikes, or as a propulsion burst that enabled surprisingly rapid lunges despite its bulk. These tubes can be found in the Gyaradomosu's back, wings, head and tail, each of which lethal but also breakable, therefore disrupting the pressure and damage-dealing capacity of these water strikes. The Gyaradomosu found within the Scarlet Forest are also much more dangerous to hunt than the ones in the Windward Plains, as the larger the amount of water stored within the body, the greater the threat of the offense. Whilst they don't have the ability to expel poison or heated gas from their underside like their successors do, they are classed just as deadly, if not more deadly than your standard Gravios. After all, imagine a monster with the same size as a building careening at you with the speed of a Valstrax. As an origin species, they are far more primitive than the Gravios. However, it is theorized that the Gyaradomosu are much more closely related to their ancestors, therefore making them much less sociable and much more aggressive. The guild, not officially recognizing origin species, is currently in the process of coming up for a name for the beast, with the frontrunners being the Torrent Gravios, the Hydra Burst Gravios, or Fabius's favorite, the Dread Flood Gravios. Should hunters wish to test their might, look no further. The Gyaradomosu is the ultimate personification of the forest, a living fortress of deadly water and ruined stone. Its power can drown armies, its charge can shatter trees, and its wrath can turn the Scarlet Forest into a storm-tossed wasteland, making it seem the inclemency has arrived early. Hunters who seek it should also remember, this is not a creature of primal rage, but of ancient instinct. When it awakens, the forest itself will seem to move against you. Bird wyverns, a special classification of monster, have had a notable reception within the Monster Hunter franchise, with highly present examples being the Puke, Gypceros, and most of the Greats and Drones. These monsters, for the most part, have been relatively small and found within early game of almost every installment of every generation. Not very often. In fact, it is an extremely rare occurrence to hear someone talking about a bird wyvern in the same vein as the highest of threats the new or old world has seen, Elder Dragons and Black Dragons, for example. However, Plum Peach seems to have been the first in a long time to make a statement as such, depending on how you choose to listen to the gibberish she comes up with.
Oi, Hunter, come, make good listenings, yeah? Something bad flapping bout in the forest. Big birdie, ain't like birdie you seen. Uses all the shiny boom booms on the woods. Fire, spark, splash, freeze. It burns the trees, makes all the lathadididons snore loud, and the stinky pink silkiness one even stinkier. You go bonk it, yeah? For it make the forest all topsy screechy.
A bird wyvern using multiple different elements at once makes it almost seem in a likeness to Elatrion. But what if this wasn't a bird wyvern making use of all the elements, but perhaps a bird wyvern making use of all the statuses? A bird wyvern not once documented within this region of the old world, a bird wyvern known as the Forokururu. The Forokururu is a much larger bird wyvern than most others, and whilst those that inhabit the flower fields can coexist relatively peacefully with most other monsters, this is seen less often in the Scarlet Forest. Granted, the Forokururu will live peacefully for the most part, but it has to be sneaky with its eating habits, as if it seeks the nectar from flowers. Some monsters such as the Dalthodon and Congalala may mistake it feeding on something else, for example mushrooms or any common flora they may eat. Speaking of which, the forest's flora is plentiful and hosts the largest variety of the Forbidden Lands, giving the Forokururu the largest arsenal in this locale. These include access to poison if drinking nectar from a poison cup or antidote herb, fire if drinking nectar from fire herbs, sleep if drinking nectar from sleep herbs, paralysis if drinking nectar doused in spores from parashrooms, soiled if drinking nectar tainted by a Congalala's stench debuff, healing if drinking nectar from a glome grass bud, defense up if drinking nectar from the adamant seed plants, and finally Dark, if drinking nectar from a smoke nut plant. This new ailment, dark, occurs when the nectar of the smoke nut plant reacts strangely with the fluids found within a Forokururu's storage sacks, allowing the Forokururu to fire out a large smoke screen almost, that which can cover most of a hunter's vision. Hunters are able to tell which element the Forokururu is attempting to utilize based on a color change found deep on the dewlap of its chin, a few feathers around its tail, but more importantly and prominently, the large number of feathers on the underside of its wings. For example, if in fire state, as it is known, the plumage will grow a crimson red with orange tips. If using poison state, it will glow a dark blue, etc. The Scarlet Forest is a brilliant place for the Forokururu to reside, firstly due to the large, almost abundant variety of plants and flora available, perhaps giving the Forokururu access to new ailments or statuses we as hunters haven't seen yet due to newer plants or combinations of multiple, possibly due to adapted storage allowing it to mix and match certain statuses as opposed to quickly swapping one for another. Secondly, because the forest's canopies provide a perfect place for the Forokururu to nest. It is the first dominant bird wyvern the Forbidden Lands has seen, driving out the likes of Yankut-ku, but wisely staying away from the wraths. It is passive, almost timid at times, but if forced to use its nectar for offense, it gets massively aggressive and territorial, able to launch globs of any specific status from specialized organs in his wings and tail. Plumpeach and the woodwards, however, care not for its passive nature, as much like the Uruki, crops are regularly disturbed, explaining why Plumpeach's statement from earlier seems to have a bit of urgency to drive it out. The Glavinus, a deadly, fierce brute wyvern that originated in Monster Hunter Generations and has diced plenty of hunters in twain throughout its existence. Arguably, at least in my less than professional opinion, the most popular member of the Fated Four. It has biologically adapted to survive any surroundings it finds itself in. However, the feature that takes center stage, of course, would be its tail. Adapted to resemble a great sword, and has more than often shown how effective it can be at wielding it. Devil Joe, a gluttonous, cannibalistic monster that shows no prejudice or judgment to any creature, deciding to attack and devour whatever it can set its eyes upon. As an invader, the Devil Joe has shown time and time again that regardless of its living situation, it can reach the top of the food chain near instantly, before devouring everything in the locale and moving on to the next. These two monsters, whilst not meeting often, fight fiercely if they do encounter each other. However, there exists a monster that seems to be a biological descendant from both of these monsters, a monster with a large blade-like tail as well as a gluttonous appetite roaming from place to place, the Abiarugu. The Abiarugu is a monster that greatly resembles a Glavinus, however it actually originated from the New World and migrated over some time ago. It is, much like the Devil Joe, an invader, using specialized bone plates on its back to take in or release heat, allowing it to accordingly alter its body temperature depending on the environment it's in. The first instance in which hunters encounter it, however, would be the Scarlet Forest, using its tail to swipe away trees in order to block a poor pack of Congalala and Conga before devouring them all in an instant, due in course to the highly acidic saliva it has, breaking down food near instantly before it moves on to wreak havoc somewhere else. Whilst it does seem to sit in other monsters' shadows, the Abiarugu differentiates itself enough to make the fight feel fresh, using fire elements to deal damage but in charged bursts rather than sweeping beams, and it does use its tail in some attacks, but not to the point it's its whole moveset, only using it occasionally as a sword, the other times to throw bony spikes at prey. When enraged, its muscle mass increases and pushes the bone plates upwards that now glow a crimson red with blood vessels, an adaptation that makes the brute wyvern a lot deadlier, yet a lot weaker. The Abiarugu in the Forbidden Lands are indeed formidable monsters and will never back down from a fight. Mizutsune, Lagiacris, Seregios, and even the apexes, the Abiarugu will fight them, and if successful, eat them. A monster with the aggression and fighting style of Glavinus, yet with the appetite yet controlled aggression of a Devil Joe is nothing to scoff at. But a select few hunters deciding to fell the creature are rarely in the business of keeping the ecosystems in check. Gemma had a hard time remembering the last time she smithed together a greatsword from a greatsword. There have been a large variety of primate-based monsters in the Monster Hunter world, from the Rajang beating everything senseless, Vishaton launching various fruits, Kechawacha being a a funny little guy, but perhaps more relevant to the Forbidden Lands, the Ajarakan, the Blangonga, and the Congalala. These three monsters were thought to be the only monkey monsters that resided in the Forbidden Lands for a long time, but the natural law of N+1 seems to have taken hold. Researchers of Astrum Unit brought back reports of spider webs cluttering the forest's base layer. However, this webbing was white. The Lalabarina was the prime suspect. However, this monster's webbing is a crimson-red color due to the paralyzing neurotoxins they're laced with. Therefore, another monster was responsible. The researchers looked for the answer, however, instead found a small monster, a small orange monkey, yet unidentified, eating some fruit before being cornered by the Woodwards. Before the researchers even had any chance to intervene, the long, silk-like material scattered around the Woodwards and launched the ground they were standing on upwards of 10 meters in the air. The Woodwards, rightfully concerned, fled, leaving the small orange monkey in the care of its parent, the Gogamoa. The Gogamoa is a physical representation of the phrase spider monkey. Its palms have small holes connected to a small organ in the hand, which shoots out a sort of silk or webbing out at great velocity. It will lick its palms, allowing the sticky saliva to make these threads stick to whatever it chooses to, whether that be trees for transport, sap-covered plants in the forest that help produce the stickiness of its saliva and the silk in its hands, or prey, hunters, and the ground in offense. In terms of offense, it will try to eviscerate prey with its sharp claws, but this silk takes front and center stage, being used to rip rocks up from the ground before thrusting them straight back down, giving itself the high ground to attack from above, or slingshotting itself across great spaces to close distance and shoulder tackle any prey. The small orange monkey, the Kokomoa, will hang around with only the female Gogamoa. The males do not take care of the young, so are relatively docile and solitary, only actively seeking food, and a female Gogamoa if it is mating season. The females, however, are the much more dangerous of the pair. They are fiercely protective of the Kokomoa and will gradually get more and more aggressive as the child takes more and more damage. If the Kokomoa takes enough, it won't be slain, but instead will run away to safety, causing the Gogamoa to go into an ultra-enraged state known as berserk, and it will be in this berserk mode permanently until it is brought down, in which case it will attack much more ferociously, sometimes seeing a bit too much red and clouding its vision, launching assaults at anything and everything it sees in the area. Congalala, Doshiguma, Lalabarina, the occasional tree, etc. The Gogamoa is a very docile monster most of the time. However, if aggravated, it can be very lethal of an opponent. It has been seen fighting against Yankut Kupaks by swinging from tree to tree with its silk before launching itself at the monsters and swiping at them with its large claws, although if possible, it will avoid these fights due to the fire weakness. Another reason, alongside aerial inferiority, it will also avoid the rats. Due to its docile nature, not a lot of monsters bother it, as it only really wanders around the forest's floor eating plants nearest to sap-dripping trees, looking after its young. The Woodwards, however, not knowing where and when they are or aren't wanted, sometimes push their luck too much with a Gogamoa, attempting to get a closer look at the child. Those that do never walk away from the resulting scrap unscathed, warning other Woodwards and hunters alike of the risks. Hunters may be powerful enough to take down the likes of Lagiacris, Arkveld, Zoshia, Arch-Tempered, etc. However, there is nothing more powerful in this world, or any other for that matter, than a parental bond. Life is a beautiful thing, and all aspects of it flourish within the Forbidden Lands. Carnivores naturally attack prey, herbivores naturally graze the greenery, the endemic life playing its part in the ecosystem's health. One such part of life that researchers thrive upon is the aspects of symbiosis and togetherness between large monsters. Most monsters choose to live in solitary, fending for themselves. However, there are examples of monsters roaming in packs. The Doshiguma and Balahara do so in the Windward Plains, the Yankut do so in the Scarlet Forest, and the Hirabami do so in the Iceshard Cliffs. Smaller practical examples, such as the rats being found close together in the forest and basin, further prove this point. However, evidence presents that there may be another example in this part of life. On an expedition to collect more Lalabarina florets, Eric found some stray hairs, fluorescent red and blue in color, that made his hair stand upon end when he touched them. Hairs that were too discolored to belong to a Doshiguma or Congalala. Upon hearing thudding and rumbling in the forest trees, trees, he carefully pried further into the discovery and saw two fanged beasts overwhelming a tempered Rathalos. Whilst their combat style was so perfected and in sync that they had little trouble defeating the flying wyvern, their recklessness forced Eric to retreat to the base camp and seek help from hunters to put them down before further damage to the ecosystem could happen. Two monsters of the same species yet genetically different, the Ray and Lolo Gogarth. The Gogarths are large, intertwined fang beasts that are rarely, if ever, separated. The red Lolo Gogarth and blue Ray Gogarth are members of the same species, however are genetically different due to the Lolo Gogarth having a rare genetic mutation, causing it to be the much rarer of the two Gogarths. Their attack style can be categorized very similarly to a tag team, with the Gogarths rebounding off of one another to fire themselves at hunters, swing each other around and launch them at prey. One may even take the attention of a potential meal, whilst the other will use their staggering ability to bounce off of the many trees before power slamming into it with its incredibly powerful forelimbs. The reasoning behind such cohesion and teamwork is actually a special ability due in part to their hair. They can generate a small amount of electrical current, that which isn't threatening when alone, but when paired with each other, this current is magnified significantly, the specific genetics of the Gogarth determining the type of charge it can produce. When together, this allows the Gogarths to manipulate magnetism to their advantage, repelling any predators, pulling in prey, as well as it being able to lift and throw objects of their weight, if not more. If these two monsters are spotted together, then the guild rarely wastes any time in getting a hunter to dispatch both of them, most of the time due to the Woodwards treading too far into enemy territory. The reason being, Plumpeach fancied a new red or blue wig. However, the recommendation is to defeat the Lolo Gogarth first, as the Lolo is the leader of the two. If it enrages, then Ray will follow suit. If Lolo leaves the area, then Ray will follow suit. If Lolo is the one to be slain first, then Ray will retreat and can no longer enrage. However, if Ray is the one to fall first, then the Lolo becomes permanently enraged, making the fight a lot more difficult for everybody involved. Because of the natures of these two monsters, if seen together, they should be eliminated post-haste, as even if they aren't bothering anyone, their play fighting with each other can quickly get out of hand, threatening entire ecosystems if they are not careful. Eric has put a huge amount of emphasis on being as prompt as possible with the eliminations, mostly due to the impact they could have if left unchecked, but Gemmed seems to think he's just a bit annoyed that they prevented him from picking his florets. Carapacians are a strange classification of monster, being distinguished from others by having crustacean-like appearances and behaviours resembling crabs and scorpions, such as having hard shells or exoskeletons. The likes of Daimyo Hermitar and Shogun Seinitar, amongst other subspecies and deviants, can be found in almost every area of the old world. However, they strangely lack any presence in the Forbidden Lands. Here exists plenty of flying wyverns, brute wyverns, fanged beasts, cephalopods, temnocerans, but no carapacians. This is until Maki goes out on another expedition in another attempt to prove herself to the elders of the tribe of Azuz, despite the inherent risks of the dangerous area. Yabran, concerned she has again gotten into more trouble than is worth, commissions the hunters to again go out and find her, in which the hunters are more than happy to oblige. Upon locating tracks and following them to Maki's hiding place, she tells them she is hiding from sentient rocks, lumbering around, dripping in oil silt. She says she knows the area much better than the time she was cornered by Rompopolo, and as much as she's described a Gravios, this monster isn't it. Upon further research of the area, it was discovered this monster was the first sighting of a Carapacian in the Forbidden Lands, a monster that is much more agile, much more dangerous, and much, much more than meets the eye, the Tychon Zamuza. The Tychon Zamuza is a massive monster covered from head to toe in mud, oil, dirt, stone, etc., all creating a rock-solid armor for the beast to use for protection, intimidation, and camouflage. These materials are able to stick to Tychon Zamuza through one of two methods. On one hand, the mushrooms Tychon Zamuza used as an adhesive in the Tide Islands may have migrated over with it, allowing the spores to spread, and therefore producing a new plant, the crude cap, a mushroom whose cap absorbs and metabolizes oil, giving it a dark dark, glossy sheen. On the other hand, the Tychon Zamuza may have migrated without the mushroom detached, and therefore had to adapt to its new locale. This adaptation came in the form of its sweat developing adhesive properties with the oil silt, allowing it to attach to its shell, as well as rocks, dirt, mud, etc. The claws of the Tychon Zamuza look drastically different, one of them normal looking, slightly smaller than the other, which itself is a dense, hulking slab of rock used to pummel and destroy anything in its path. But this isn't the true form of the Tychon Zamuza. This isn't even close to scratching the rocks off the metaphorical surface. As Tychon Zamuza consistently takes damage, the oil silt will begin to slip and parts of the rock will break off, exposing his outer, bright orange shell. As more and more of this rock is broken, the Tychon Zamuza becomes slightly weaker, but much faster and much more aggressive due to excess weight being lifted. The claws remain relatively similar. The large club is just as dangerous, but the claw has increased in lethality tenfold, now being used for offense, stabbing and slicing opponents, gliding through the oil silt with little to no effort in order to crush its opponents once and for all. But this still isn't the true form. Once brought to within an inch of its life, the Tychon Zamuza decides to shed away with its orange shell, instead presenting a much smaller, much brighter creature, a blue exoskeleton, now without a club arm but with two razor-sharp, pinpoint needle-like claws that are further imbued with strength thanks to the thunder-producing organs it now has access to. This is such a stark difference from how the fight starts. It's almost scary how a monster this small was able to walk around wearing armor, weighing it down with what must have been thousands of times its own body weight. The fight with Tychon Zamuza is almost a homage to the rest of the Carapacians in the series, the rocky armor having the sluggishness of Shen Garan but the power of Stonefist Hermitar, the orange-shelled mid-phase having similarities to the Daimyo, and the final phase, quick, agile, sharp, being closely linked to the Shogun Scimitar. In all three phases, however, it's powerful enough to cause cave-ins within the basin, shifting up weaknesses and attack styles, which is why Maki may be asking for a chaperone whenever she goes out into the wild of the basin from now on. Invaders within Monster Hunter are always a nuisance to not only hunters but residents of locales, endemic life, maybe even the ecosystem itself. Notable examples of invaders would be, specifically within Monster Hunter Worldborn, the Bambaro, the Rajang, the Deviljho, and the Bazelgeuse, the latter three causing humongous amounts of issues with hunters just wishing to go on a peaceful hunt, either obliterating the prey and stealing the kill, using the prey as a chew toy and running away with the prize, or carpet bombing the exact area of the hunt and leaving all evidence of the target in a pile of ash. There exists more invader monsters, of course, however there exists one that makes anyone learning about it greatly uncomfortable. A monster that primarily dwells in the sea, but have slowly but surely become invasive to swampy, uneven locales. These monsters bear only water element on their own, however have the unsettling ability to suck the ailments out of other monsters to use as it sees fit. A leech-like monster that most will know as the Barlagual. The Barlagual is a monster that, on its own, can still be very threatening. Its body is covered in a thin layer of mucus that acts in part as an insulator, protecting the Barlagual from the harsh heat of the basin, and also allows it to slip through the oil silt without having any stick to them. However, it serves another purpose. This mucus is very watery and can be shaken off as a projectile, that which when mixed with natural body fluids can become extremely corrosive, damaging hunters and prey alike, and causing defense down. However, this is hardly the strangest form of offense the Barlagual has. It differs from its Leviathan brethren, having smooth, stretchy skin as opposed to an armored, scaly look, and will use its forelimbs a lot more often in battle. These forelimbs are very powerful, with a specialized fin that's covered in microscopic electric-proof tentacles, allowing for swatting of enemies, faster swimming and movement through oil silt, and burrowing underground. However, the center stage is taken by its tongue. The Leviathan has a long, tube-like tongue that will pierce any unfortunate prey the Barlagual finds, and will begin sucking the poor thing dry. The blood is sent through the tongue to specially evolved organs that can separate the toxins or other poisons from the blood itself, storing them in sacs found along the neck and all the way down the body. As more and more toxins fill these sacs, they expand and grow bigger, clearly showing the fluorescent poisons that give hunters an indication of what element the Barlagual now has access to. The most common ailments being poison and paralysis from Iodrome and Gendrome respectively. The Barlagual in the Oilwell Basin, however, use slightly different ailments. It will still use poison, bison and rely on it most of the time by sucking the blood of a Rumpopolo or Gypseros, but it will also gain access to blastfly if it sucks the blood of an Ijarakan. If for whatever reason the Barlagwal has no access to these monsters, it may begin to suck the blood of a Kraladath, Geladron or Hunter. In these scenarios, the sacs on the sides of its body will glow a fluorescent red, the blood having been combined with the corrosive body fluids and now, if exhaled, corrodes weapons, reducing their max sharpness and putting an even bigger power gap between prey and predator. Barlagwal don't have to rely on prey for ailment-based attacks though, as in the swamp jungle it can suck the poison straight out of the soil should it need to. The Barlagwal of the basin will suck up the oil silt, causing its sacs to discolor to a jet black, and will again use the corrosive body fluids to ignite it, giving the monster access to fire blight in a pinch. It will use all of these ailments with scary efficiency, spraying it out as a gas, shooting them out as a beam, or impaling prey with its tail to inject the poison into it directly. Hunters of the basin have little to no fear of anything, and will pick up any job as soon as they come along. However, if that job is to hunt down a Barlagwal, then for some, the blood will drain from their face before they've even been impaled by the Leviathan's tongue. As far as invader hunts go, it seems that these unfortunate few would rather get used as a chew toy or carpet bombed instead. Deviants are strange and rare cases within Monster Hunter. They differ from subspecies and variants, the former being a long-established evolutionary shoot-off of a species, and the latter being a rare, powerful mutation of the species, not a separate evolutionary branch. Deviants are instead individuals of a specific species whose unique life has altered it dramatically, examples being decisions, fights, injury, that sort of thing, with the most notable examples being the Silver-Winged Naga Cougar, the Grimclaw T-Rex, and the Bloodbath Diablos. Deviants are found exclusively within MHG and MHGU, setting them in the Old World, and so eventually one would naturally wander towards the Forbidden Lands. For reasons unknown, instinctive anomaly, early trauma, or freak encounter, a Diablos on its way to becoming a bloodbath developed a compulsive drive to seek out challenges instead of defending its territory. Rather than fight rivals in the dunes, it left them behind entirely, crossing vast distances in search of apex predators. This desire for escalation brought it to the Oilwell Basin, an environment rich in oil, fire, and tough predators. This is classified as a deviant because it goes far beyond Diablos norms, becoming monstrous through choices and trauma, not mutation or adaptation, being given the name the Blazebath Diablos, otherwise known to those in Mesoporta in the Interceptor's base as the Verusa Barossu. The Verusa Barossu is a fierce, terrifying Diablos bird species clad in hellfire with an overwhelming bloodlust. Its shell is deformed, blackened, yet white-hot due to the extreme heat it is constantly exposed to. Its tusks are sharp, but boiling upon contact, and much like the bloodbath, its body temperatures can reach such heights that its sweat can make it appear as if the beast is smoking. Their wings have protruding spikes, that with their sharper claws and harder horns makes it easier to dig through the denser ground of the basin. The Verusa Barossu, despite its appearance, remains a herbivore, seeking out and eating new, rare species of cacti that have begun to grow in the basin, the tar blossom cactus. In an effort to branch out the vegetation available in the zoos, a tribe member, either too eager or completely in over their head, managed to get their hands on some cactus from the Old World, and through processes like asexual reproduction and grafting, some of these hybrid cacti adapted to survive off the basin's gifts, and produced this tar blossom cactus, which inevitably spread throughout the whole locale. The Verusa Barossu will, even to its own detriment, attempt to eat this tar blossom during fights, as it has very special benefits. The tar blossom cactus holds volatile properties as it grows in regions rich in oil silt and gases produced by the large vents, and so when eaten by the Verusa Barossu, the nutrients in the cactus itself are digested, whilst the juices are transported to special sacs within the tail, back, and head. The intense body heat of the Verusa Barossu ignites the volatility of the juices, causing incredibly hot flames to burst out from vents on the Verusa Barossu's body. In this state, it is a huge threat, capable of launching itself across large distances instantly, leaving trails of fire behind it. Its anger and intensity skyrocket. Its focus now purely on destroying the prey it seeks, and so every effort must be made to prevent it from eating the tar blossom. Hunters can pick up this cactus and carry it around in a similar manner to wyvern eggs, however doing so will cause gradual tick damage due to its intense heat, and will draw the attention of the Verusa Barossu. This initiates a game of cat and mouse almost, with hunters able to roll the cactus towards each other in an attempt to keep it from the Verusa Barossu. Successfully keeping the cactus away means the Verusa Barossu will grow lethargic, its speed drops, its intensity troughs, and it will sometimes trip over itself when charging, making the fight a lot more manageable. Special licenses must be obtained by hunters before they can seek out and hunt the Verusa Barossu, as is traditional protocol with deviants. However, they should be taken as a top priority. After all, a Diablos with the intenseness and bloodlust for battle of a bloodbath, the strength and power to rival an apex, all tied together to now be ultra-territorial of the basin due to this new cactus. The guild worry that this new deviant, the Blazebath Diablos, could destroy all life within the basin if left unchecked for too long. The White Lake, a locale introduced in Frontier G8, is a locale with possibly the most unfitting name. The White Lake sounds to me like a large open pool of water surrounded by grassland and perhaps mountains covered in snow, that which alters the climate, causing the snow to fall around the water, the lake itself being lined with white sand, all of which gives it its namesake. However, this is sadly not the case, at least not anymore. Some much older residents can recount stories passed on from their grandfathers who were told by their grandfathers before them of a time when the White Lake was, in fact, a large water source, an underwater ecosystem with no shortage of flourishing existence. Unfortunately, droughts hit, forcing more and more aquatic life out of the reduced water, with very few surviving the resulting Darwinism. One such life to survive and evolve was an organism that continued to adapt as the White Lake did. Once a vast inland sea, slowly but surely turned into the White Lake we now know, a desolate wasteland of white sand deserts. This organism still shows signs of its ancient sea-bound lifestyle, but flourishes in deserts and swampy locales. A gluttonous, poisonous brute wyvern that now finds its way to the Oilwell Basin, the Gasura Bazura. The Gasura Bazura finds itself in the Oilwell Basin rather than the Windward Plains specifically for its diet. Those in the White Lake would feed almost exclusively on Kusabami, a small scorpion monster that uses poison as defense. In replacement of this, the Gasura Bazura of the basin choose to feed on the bigger monsters, Gypceros and Rhombopola. Through feeding on these monsters, it is able to extract the poison they would use and wield it with a scary amount of practical application. The gaps between its scales not only drip this poison but also aid in producing its own. It will spew out poison as a noxious gas or in small liquidized pools, that which it will hit with melee swings to disperse the poison in a much wider area. It can pump this poison through its teeth, administering it through just a simple bite, and will create pitfall traps which it will flood with poison, meaning any hunter that doesn't prepare themselves with enough antidotes may as well garnish themselves and hop on a silver platter. However, hunters that think themselves smart by wearing armor and talismans with poison resistance will be severely underestimating the lethality of this brute wyvern on its own. When enraged, the Gasura Bazura will abandon poison in its entirety and will use the well-adapted lungs from its aquatic days to pump an obscene amount of blood through its body, inflating the muscles in its arms, legs and tail to a huge degree. The Gasura Bazura's blood is always hot, which aids in the expansion of its muscles, potentially explaining why the Gasura Bazura found in the heated basin are naturally bigger than others. In this state, the melee swings from its arms are much more efficient, its charges are a lot more deadly, and its tail can slam down, crushing everything between it and the ground. However, this state acts as a sort of Super Saiyan 3 form, as the sheer amount of blood going towards the muscles means a reduced amount going to the heart, putting a huge amount of physical stress on the monster, not to mention the basin's extreme temperatures causing exhaustion. When Gasura Bazura can't hold it any longer, it won't dig itself out a large pillar of rock to jump off like the ones found in the White Lake, but will instead use whatever strength it has left to leap high into the air, using one of the many walls already found in the basin caves to rebound itself at incredibly impressive velocity, exhausting the last bit of effort it has and forcing him out of his enraged state. Gasura Bazura are considered apex predators within the White Lake and hold themselves high in the chain within the basin too, but will choose to lay dormant, sleeping in the oil silt until either hungry or disturbed. God help you if you are the reason for the latter, as Gasura Bazura is mightily aggressive if awoken prematurely, and if not prepared, a hunter's palico will be ready to present the silver platter in which hunters are to be served upon. The Oilwell Basin is well known for a few things, but the first that comes to mind is the tribe of Azus, and more importantly, the fire spring. During this artificial inclemency, the entirety of the basin explodes in flame. Fire covers almost all areas of the locale, but a byproduct of this reaction would be the many gases that get exuded from the many chimneys, pipes and tubes that scatter the locale. This gas has a humongous role in the weather cycle and ecosystem in the basin, building up gradually in the fallow, used for ignition and combustion during the fire spring, and transformation into mineral-rich terrain in the plenty. Monsters like Rompopolo will use it to pump gas explosions into oil silts, and will be created passively through reactions such as a Jarrakan launching into the ground, the new Udra igniting itself in battle, and the Gravios exuding it either as poison or sleep to harm opponents. Put simply, wherever there is fire, gas will be present as part of the fire triangle, and will be produced as a product of the reaction. It's everywhere. However, there is one monster that will weaponize it a lot more than most others. A monster that is the only known predator of another monster already talked about, the Bagabadarumu. The Bagabadarumu is a humongous monster layered with flabby skin, playing the role of a shock absorber, due in part to its internal organs being unable to properly absorb and process gas, so will disperse them, as well as the gases produced within its own body, through a series of tubes on its arm, back, head and tail. These gases, of course, being extremely flammable, ignite due to the Bagabadarumu producing sparks with its teeth and claws. The monster the Bagabadarumu will prey upon is the Gasura Bazura, meaning that the poisonous gases within the monster only adds to the Bagabadarumus destructive capabilities, and my god does he know how to use and abuse them. It can slam its tail into the ground, pumping it full of gas for a landmine type explosion. It'll charge at hunters, leaving behind puddles of gas before igniting one, causing a huge chain reaction of explosions in his wake. Even despite his huge size, he can use the explosions to propel himself into the air and come careening back down to earth, landing with an even greater kaboom. Naturally, in the interest of keeping these internal gases as plentiful as possible, the Bagabadarumu will keep to the upper layers of the basin, as that is where the many chimney-like vents expel it in abundance, providing it with a constant and renewable weapon. Midway through the fight, he will develop these limbs and tubes, increasing his capacity to expel gas and therefore his explosive capabilities. Although, if hunters are persistent enough, breaking the parts of its body these tubes can be found on will damage the tubes themselves and weaken the gas output, reducing the power of these ignitions. A monster with such destructive capabilities being resident to a locale that has such fragile framing, with the exposed machinery laying around, tubes and runways supported within strips of rock, it's almost a recipe for disaster. Not to mention, the excess gas exuded from the Bagabadarumu could potentially cause another massively overreactive fire spring. The same was the case with the Gogmazios, of course. The scale of this threat was much larger. However, Fabius, not keen to relive the potentially catastrophic hypothetical, asks that all of these monsters be put down before their gassy nature can cause too much damage to the locale. However, looking on the bright side, Gemma is looking to provide the people of Azuz with another prototype garment, this one forged from the excess skin of the monster to provide protection from the explosions in the basin. With the nature and volatility of the oil silts, this has seemed to gain a bit more approval than the Ignacta garments, at the very least. Expansions in the Monster Hunter series are traditionally seen as access to the full game, with master rank difficulty essentially making anything high rank or lower a sort of tutorial, as people have dubbed it. However, the difficulty doesn't immediately spike to extreme levels until much later in the game. Granted, the first introduction fights are still difficult, but not too difficult, such as the case for Yankutku in MHGU's G-Rank, Beotodus and Bambro in Iceborne, and Daimyo Hermitar in Sunbreak. Within the Wilds DLC then, it should be predictable that the first new monsters players meet should be of a similar standard, with one such being resident in the Iceshard Cliffs. This monster doesn't present any extreme damage spike or unbelievable elements or ailments as most Frontier monsters possess, instead just a standard Leviathan with a less than standard Leviathan moveset. Rove experienced this monster firsthand when on his adventures he documented a new small monster, a seal, walrus type monster he dubbed the Pokara. These monsters seemed friendly and passive at first, until the rumbling of a screeching shockwave that stunned him forced a retreat. Upon guild research of this monster, it was discovered to be none other than the Pokaradon. Pocarodon differs from other leviathans of its caliber, the likes of Royal Ludroth, etc., as most leviathans are reptiles. However, Pocarodon is a mammal, confusing researchers as to why it isn't classified as a fanged beast, alongside the likes of Razaros and Lagombi, for example. Either way, the Pocarodon is a huge beast, adapted to the cold by not holding in any internal body heat, but has massively thick skin and blubber that repels the outside cold. This makes them not only extremely durable, but also very heavy. However, the Pocarodon is able to throw itself around the cliffs with a frightening level of speed, agility, and accuracy. Passive by nature, they live amongst a harem of smaller monsters, which, as we've already discussed, are the Pocara, as well as pups called the Poca. The Pocarodon are extremely territorial of this harem, and will adhere to the dominance hierarchy in a similar manner to the Doshiguma, regardless of if it is an Argveld, Rathma, or another Pocarodon. Any monster that threatens this harem will feel the force of this leviathan, most of the time being packs of Blangos and Blangonga, who like to make themselves a nuisance to most living in the cliffs. As well as launching itself at foes, it maintains the standard leviathan moveset with tucks, rolls, and lunges, but will also shoot out a ball of water capable of delivering a fierce impact. Its role as a protector means its tusks are more designed as weapons than tools, using them to stab at opponents or rip up chunks of the ground to create its own pitfall traps. And its hands, described as metal-like, can clap together to create a stunning sound, which will leave prey unable to avoid the full frontal assault to follow. Choosing to slay some of the Poca or Pocara before engaging with Pocarodon will send him into a constant enraged phase, where he will disregard everything, including the structural integrity of the cliffs, his own safety, and potentially the safety of the remaining harem. However, if slain while protecting its harem, hunters will be able to pick up a few extra rewards in the form of frozen crystal tears, tearing away the humanity of those committing the deed. Rove will tell you the Pocarodon are a peaceful species that like to play around in the snow and ice. However, if you see this happening, then keep well away. Any encroachment towards the harem will cause it to keep its guard up, and any interaction with the Pocara will initiate fight or flight. The Pocarodon knows not of flight, and instead you should expect no mercy whatsoever. Rove has even expressed a disliking to the beast, preferring instead to keep himself in the company of Nursilla, if even to his own detriment. We have already discussed the Glavenus, a massive brute wyvern with capabilities of using its specialized jaws and teeth to sharpen its blade-like tail to a frightening degree. This species can be found almost everywhere. The Glavenus can be found in the ancient forest, Wildspire Waste, and Elder's Recess, to name a few, and the acidic Glavenus makes home of the Rotten Vale. And the Hellblade Glavenus also makes residence of jungles, deserts, and volcanoes. Even the Abiarugu, a monster that could potentially be part of the same family, can be found in forests and swamps. One locale, however, that has been disregarded is the frozen snow-based locales. There is, however, one such monster, similar to those aforementioned brute wyverns, that does make this their home. A monster that some theorize is the original form of the Abiarugu, as whilst some were forced to move out from the polar sea due to lack of food, those that moved to warmer climates became Abiarugu, but those that found and remained in colder environments like the Iceshard Cliffs stayed as they are, the Jiaorugu. The Jiaorugu, much like the Abiarugu, is a predator that is to be taken with the utmost seriousness, as any hunter believing they are in for an easy fight will surely be cleaved in two before they can acknowledge the guild's authorization to hunt it. They share lots of similarities with their woodland cousins, their dinosaur-esque facial structure, their corrosive saliva, fearsome backspikes, and jagged teeth, but most importantly their tail, still resembling a greatsword. However, the Jiaorugu ups the ante slightly. On top of borrowing traits and abilities similar to Glavenus and Deviljo, it will also imitate the Uragan, using the large spikes on their back as traction to ball up and roll at opponents. The thick ice and caves rock allow for excellent grip whilst attacking in this manner. When enraged, the Jiaorugu becomes twice as deadly, plunging its tail into the ice, and thanks to the properties of its blood can form a long, lance-like weapon twice the size of the brute wyvern's normal tail, giving it a more bladed and dangerous edge that becomes much more deadly if fought in the frost winds, adding an extra layer of biting cold to the blade's edge. It can also purposefully coat its back spikes in its blood, that which will freeze instantly under the biting cold, creating another more fearsome layer of frozen blood spikes. A Jiaorugu proficient in using these kinds of moves is a challenge to take down, capable of cleaving Hirobami packs in two with a single swing, chasing off whole packs of Blangonga, sometimes even squaring up to a Gormagala, although most of the time to no avail. The adaptation to the cliffs is extremely apparent, with the pale blue skin acting as camouflage and its body body temperature at risk of freezing, so must constantly be on the move, either in transit or offense. Whilst the Abiyarugu was limited to melee strikes and close quarters combat, the Jarugu has adapted to be able to release extended beams of frozen liquid, instantly freezing anything that it comes into contact with. As if this beast wasn't fearsome enough, it is also capable of releasing this liquid in concentrated quantities through its fangs, meaning that anything that is caught in this thing's bite will be injected, freezing everything within an instant, also while being steadily exposed to the creature's corrosive saliva, again resulting in the defense down debuff. With the Jarugu being theorized to be the original form of Abiyarugu, it is difficult to determine which came first. There is a constant debate ongoing with guild scouts and researchers as to whether they should be known as the Abiyarugu and rename the Jarugu to Bitterblade Abiyarugu, or keep the frozen version as is and rename the Abiyarugu to the Silverblade Jarugu. Rosso, Olivia and the other hunters quite frankly couldn't care less, as long as Gemma can keep smithing great swords from great swords. The Iceshard Cliffs is a large, enclosed space, the outer wall of a ruined settlement. As I was likely rightly corrected in the last ranking, the one outlier that was probably more ambitious for the cliffs than most others was the Zamtrios. The main argument against Zamtrios was that it's a monster that burrows, but how deep and how hard is the wall if it was to get underneath? If it can't go under, it definitely couldn't go over. The obvious change was for the Lunagaron, and I admit that was a big fumble. However, looking through Frontier's monster list, they're presented a fitting replacement. A flying wyvern that burrows like Zamtrios, but also has the ability to fly, providing a reasoning for it entering the cliffs. An icy, monstrous beast, the apex of the polar field, and likely the apex of the cliffs when Arkveld, Gormagala and Jindahard aren't present. Evidence of this monster appearance prompted guild research, and lo and behold, the king of the polar fields has come to claim its new territory and expand its kingdom, the Onora Patisu. The Onora Patisu is a fearsome flying wyvern resembling a carpenter shark due to its saw-like nose. Its title as Apex is due to it almost being a combination of multiple different monsters at once. It has the standard 360 tail swipe of Rathalos, the tail backflip of Rathian, the double tail slam of Diablos alongside the biting lunges and hip checks. However, the Onora Patisu uses the Iceshard Cliffs to its advantage, using the extreme temperatures to great effect. It can dig its horn into the ground and create a huge geyser of freezing cold mist, that which obstructs hunters' view to follow up with a huge dive attack. He can also create this mist by firing a huge ball into the ground. This mist being so extraordinarily below freezing, any moisture in the air instantly freezes, creating a rain of icicles that tear whatever they touch to shreds, that which doubles in size and duration depending on the inclemency, and due to the strange gravitational phenomenon of the cliffs, these icicles, for whatever reason, seem to have a mind of their own, tracking onto hunters in certain situations. This, in and of itself, is not enough to classify the Onora Patisu as a high-level threat. Jindahard and Gormagala would likely have a field day with it at this level. That is until it becomes enraged or reaches a low enough health pool, where it will do what only one other flying wyvern is capable of. It will imbue itself and its attacks with the dragon element, almost as a last resort to destroy anything it deems necessary, its mist attacks now crackling with unmistakable red lightning. The Onora Patisu is an exceptionally aggressive predator and will recognize everything as potential prey, even members of its own kind. The only time it will seem the slightest bit hesitant is when it comes into contact with Jin, Arkveld or Gore. Because of the aggressiveness and danger this monster poses, the guild authorizes it to be hunted upon sight. Most hunters understand the deadliness this monster poses, however there are a small group of talented yet naive hotshot few who think that this monster is just a slightly bigger, slightly faster Beartodus. Those who go into a hunt with this mindset quickly realize that they need to be twice as attentive, twice as careful, twice as efficient, lest they get torn into twice as many pieces. The Iceshard Cliffs are an almost deserted, paranormal wasteland of frost and rock. Caves make up a large portion of the lower levels, whilst the upper levels are strangely man-made. Thin walkways that seem to act as bridges, and some upper-level caves contain a strangely architectural structure, more refined than that of the lower levels. Since the Iceshard Cliffs are the closest of locales to the ruins of Wyveria, it isn't out of the realm of imagination to think that the Iceshard Cliffs were once an extension of Wyveria, and so have been theorized that these buildings, tall, dark, with spires peering out from the frozen canopy, are cathedrals, a theory that was forged from explorers seeing the structures from the distance of Suja, but with a slight hum of song from an instrument that most would associate with such buildings, the organ. Hearing this beautiful melody, the explorers made their way towards the Iceshard Cliffs, ventured into one of these buildings resonating sweet symphonies, only to discover this building was in fact a nest. Not the nest of the organ that they thought had made the sound, but the nest of the Poboromarumu. The Poboromarumu of the highlands is a humongous whale-like creature classified as a flying wyvern, but having to compete with other flying wyverns like Gurenzaburu resulted in their ancestors being cast down, devolving their wings into small stumps present on the monsters of today. The Poboromarumu of the Iceshard Cliffs have also adapted, as over whatever method of transport these monsters used to enter, they've naturally become slimmer and slightly smaller, which allows them to traverse the cliffs without bringing the whole place down upon them. The chilling winds of the cliff acts as the Poboromarumu's main form of attack, but rather than act like Jindahad or Blangonga, the icy breeze instead is inhaled and then exuded through one of the many tubes found along the monster's back, that which when paired with the harmonical vibrations of the wings and the beating of its tail can create plenty of stunning song, that which can be used to the monster's benefit. These instrument attachments the Poboromarumu can utilize make it a living hunting horn, with the extremely unique ability to buff itself with attack up, defense up, and healing buffs if it so chooses, with the option of singing a tune to grant all three at once. Hunters that find themselves in close proximity to this monster may find that their hunt goes quicker initially, only due to the buffs the Poboromarumu can activate also apply to close enough hunters. However, if too close, these songs can cause delirium, causing those afflicted to prance about for a few seconds before snapping out, allowing the Poboromarumu ample time to deal some damage, that which happens far too often only due to the claustrophobic feel of the cliffs, especially in the cathedral buildings. The Poboromarumu may instead use this time to attempt to heal itself, but vigilant hunters can stop this process from happening as bubbling water can be visible on the parts the monster is choosing to heal. Despite the fact that monsters like Nursilla, Blangonga and Hirabami will vacate any area in which they sense a Poboromarumu due to the high risk of being devoured, the Poboromarumu is a favourite monster of a fair few hunters, with a lot of them actively seeking to hang around it just to hear its songs. The music, if the Poboromarumu is unaware of hunters, is an excellent way of healing injuries or perhaps buffing oneself for a different hunt without using any armor skins or demon drugs. However, the Poboromarumu are extremely territorial, and with their large frame, bludgeoning tail and many rows of razor-sharp teeth, those who are spotted attempting to cop a sneaky heal may inadvertently leave the encounter with more damage having been done, if they are lucky to have walked away at all. The Iceshard Cliffs is a brilliantly beautiful spectacle with views stretching as far as the eye can see, plenty of buildings for those caught in the open to take shade, and lots of life that flourishes such as the Rathma, Hirabami packs, Gore and Arkveld nesting in the highest points. Even the less liked creatures like the Komachi find plenty of reason to stick around. This area houses some of the hardest fights the game will have to offer, such as the aforementioned Arkveld and Gore Magala, as well as the Arch-tempered Jindahad and the Omega Planetes, although this is only the upper layers of the region, as the lower Rime Chain Peak only goes down about halfway. The lower you go, the more unsettling and spookier the locale becomes, as Nursilla prefer the darker caves, stringing up Gypsaros and Rove for later consumption and housing a family of thousands of hatchlings in the dark. However, there isn't any evidence to suggest that this is the lowest of the lows for the cliffs. After all, Rove is constantly exploring and finding new areas. Eventually, he does such a thing. Curiosity would one day get the better of him, and through following the land spine into the deepest parts of the cliffs, a series of caves is found, and much darker than ones we know now. Little to no life resided, with only a small amount of adapted Komachi clinging to the walls in wait for an ambush, and possibly the occasional Gore Magala, the light being no issue since it uses other senses to see. Another monster residing in these caves is another monster that uses such sensitive senses to see, a fully blind, possible burst species, the Meriganasu. The Meriganasu, the burst species of Espinas, is a creature that dwells in only the deepest, darkest areas of any locales it chooses to inhabit, which results in it being completely blind, however adapting extremely large ears and metallic scales to grant itself a sort of echolocation. Its dark blue hide grants it camouflage from any other potential predators, although down at this depth there are rarely any others to give Meriganasu grief, normally only being other members of its own species. It will prey on literally anything that makes sound, hearing it instantly and launching launching itself at the foe with extreme hostility, not ceasing to attack whatever it is that has made the noise until either the prey dies, it dies, or something else makes more noise. It will use its ability to create sound waves to stun hunters, but most of the time will use attacks that some will recognize from the Espinasse, charges, horn swipes, tail slams, etc. The cliffs, despite its unnatural gravitational phenomenon, provide little to no advantage for the hunters for this fight, as the Meriganasu has two specifically designed thorns on its head that completely protect it from falling rocks. Therefore, the standard protocol of higher up fights of launching floating boulders into the monster to get some free damage in DPS phases won't work on this beast. Instead, hunting parties are recommended to hunt in a similar style to Omega Planetes. The Meriganasu will attack whichever hunter makes the most noise, and so this would preferably be a lance or a sword and shield to tank most of the attacks. However, support hunters like hunting horns playing their musical buffs as they do are rarely not the target for the Meriganasu, causing quite a bit of chaos. Their adaptation to the cliffs has given them the ability to wield a new element, darkness. This is a mixture of both dragon and ice element, both allowing them to shoot forwards at extreme speeds through his tail and wings and inflict prey with both dragon blight and ice blight simultaneously, cutting off their means of both elemental damage and stamina management respectively. The Meriganasu is a monster that should not only be hunted to protect the ecosystem of the cliffs when necessary, but also the Forbidden Lands as a whole. After all, it only lives in deep caves of the cliffs where there are absolutely no settlements, groups, tribes, etc. living here. If it were to venture elsewhere, the Azuz tribe, Woodwards, Kunafans, or the Wyverians of Suja would all surely attract this beast with their post-inclemency celebrations. If this is the case, then due to the monster's extremely quick digging speed, it can be assumed that any earthquakes felt may no longer be a part of the natural world. The Berakurosu, which we have already talked about, is a fearsome monster in and of itself. However, the concept of any variance or deviance is a truly scary idea indeed. As is common knowledge at this point, a variant is an individual of a species that has undergone a mutation or specialized adaptation of sorts. The most well-known examples of variants in the Monster Hunter universe being the Savage Deviljho, a Deviljho whose extreme hunger causes permanent enrage, Primordial Malzeno, the original unparasitized version of Sunbreak's flagship, and the Crimson Glow Valstrax, a Valstrax whose overloaded dragon element can't be controlled, causing it to glow a striking crimson. Berakurosu, however, can be distinguished from all of the aforementioned variants. Instead of gaining extra power through sheer unrelenting anger or freak mutation, it instead gained power through learning and discipline. These few Berakurosu gain access to the dragon elements, transforming them into a much more dangerous beast, known as the Doragurosu. The Doragurosu was the hardest monster for me to place, and will likely result in a lot of retconning or otherwise, only due to the fact that whilst he seems like one of the most fitting monsters for the ruins, he is essentially a big dragon with whip/chain-like appendages that will regularly use the dragon element. This, upon reading about him on a baseline level, seemed to make him exactly like an Arcveld, and so I tried to come up with a variant called the Trionurosu, a guardian version of the Berakurosu that had access to Berakurosu's thunder elements, the Doragurosu's dragon element, and the Xenosaurisu's water element, a combination of all three. However, this did seem like I was jumping the shark a bit. Upon scrapping that idea, I instead decided to lean into the similarities. Either the Doragurosu follows on from the lore of the Frontier franchise, in that it is a developed, well-disciplined Berakurosu that has migrated and developed dragon element, although contrasting the Berakurosu's attack style, instead preferring to be grounded, mirroring Arcveld's primarily ground-based assaults, differentiating them from their brethren of the Gorge, and separating itself from the styles of the Rathian and Rathalos. On the other hand, the Doragurosu is instead called the Guardian Berakurosu, the ancient civilization's original Arcveld, having wanted a guardian with the aggression of Berakurosu but imbued with the dragon element as well as thunder. The Guardian Berakurosu is a flying wyvern with whip-like chain blades on its arms, covered in a white fur that crackles a crimson, orange and dragon element when enraged. Over the course of thousands of years and the civilization's near detrimental drive to create stronger and stronger monsters monsters. Genetic splicing and hybridization led the Guardian Berikiriosu to slowly but surely become the Guardian Arkveld, and the rest is history. Whichever would be the case, the Dorag Yurosu will attack in an extremely similar manner to the Berikiriosu, using its whips and quills to tear prey apart and fending off any potential large threats with its incredible intelligence. Its claws are a lot stronger than the Berikiriosu's though, being able to rip up rocks on the ground and launch them at foes, and has been seen using them as a sort of slingshot to catapult itself at enemies. The one difference, however, is that instead of killing itself in a death before dishonor move, it will play dead, taking a leaf out of the Gypsaros's book of all things. This is a much more threatening false death though, as once it returns to the fight it will explode with a violent torrent of dragon elements, that which is so powerful it could kill large monsters instantly, its body burning a horrid flaming red. The guild, whilst not fully aware of the full potential of this monster, fear the day it learns from its possible evolutionary outcome. Like the Arkveld, there is a very real chance this monster learns that the Guardian moniker isn't permanent, and so God help us if history is to repeat itself. Guardians are a subset of monsters not yet properly discussed. For those uneducated few, the ancient civilization created the Guardians as a means of protection, as servants or soldiers, that is until the Guardians Oshia, this series' closest attempt to display the fabled equal dragon weapon, decided to rebel against its creators. It siphoned off the Wilk that gave the Guardians power, essentially living off an infinite fuel source, causing both the destruction of Wyveria and the rest of the Guardians to lay dormant. Until modern day, when the Avis unit and Astrum units ventured into the ruins, the Guardians began to reawaken. Some Guardians like the Rathalos and Doshiguma are created from base species, whilst others like Ebonio Dogoron and Folgar Anjanath are created from subspecies. An Arkveld was a Guardian created from an extinct species. There also exists many more different monster variations, however creating Guardians from variants is near impossible due to their rarity, and creating them from deviants is far too difficult. Both is the case for example, the rare species. However, this isn't to say that the Guardians won't discover this side of their lineage on their own. One such possibility, the Guardian Espinas. The Guardian Espinas, as it is now referred to, will remain passive until disturbed, in a state not quite sleeping yet not quite awake. Since the Guardians have no need for sleep, it will hang around pools of Wilk, performing an act Eric has dubbed Wilk anchoring, where it will patch wounds, nourish itself, and regain strength, but at a much slower rate, almost as if it has docked itself into a charging station. When interrupted, it will maintain the Espinas' short temper, immediately enraging and throwing itself at prey. The Guardian Espinas maintains a very similar attack style to the base, using its sheer size and strength to bulldoze anything it comes into contact with, clobbering whatever is in its way with its massive tail and firing off volleys of explosive fireballs, that which also hold properties capable of poisoning and paralyzing prey. The one differentiating factor is that when desperately enraged, it will reach past its normal limits and enter a state even further beyond. Whilst fighting normally, the Wilk of the Guardians is absorbed in its body, never traditionally making an aesthetic statement except within a few blood vessels near the surface of the body. However, when properly enraged, the Guardian Espinas will pump blood much faster, distributing a lot more of the Wilk all over its body, causing its carapace to turn a pearly white almost all over, and will flood poison to its spikes and thorns, turning them a fluorescent purple, giving it a striking resemblance to the white Espinas, its rare species. In this form, breaking its horns, its wings, and its back will reveal red blood, but breaking the chest reveals purple blood, potentially suggesting that the Guardian Espinas' access to poison is a lot more abundant than the researchers believe. It has a much greater manipulation of its poisonous flames in this form, shooting them in fireballs much bigger than normal, creating a much larger and much longer lasting pool of lingering fire, and will stomp around the ruins using its claws and tail to uproot veins of Wilk imbued with either venomous fire or paralyzing flame. However, the most dangerous attack of them all is where it will fly up into the air and create an absolutely humongous tornado of fire, that which also has paralyzing and poisonous properties to it. If it chooses to use this attack, it will exhaust all of the excess Wilk and poison it is forcibly distributed all over its body, returning to its base Guardian form and needing to rest itself with a pool of Wilk before reactivating this phase. Those that take advantage of this will be blessed with a rather large opportunity to damage the Guardian Espinas. However, those that do not either have a Farcaster, guard ability, or plenty of mega potions and antidotes will unfortunately see themselves being burnt to a pile of ash, falling victim to a tremendously toxic venom, or what is most likely, both. Status is a mechanic already briefly covered and is a very, very important weapon in most monsters' arsenals. Rathalos wouldn't be Rathalos without his fire, Kezu wouldn't be Kezu without his paralysis, Nightshade wouldn't be Nightshade without his sleep. However, it is uncommon that monsters will get access to more than one status effect. Ursula inflicts sleep and poison, Rathian inflicts poison and fire blight, and Basilgeuse inflicts blast blight and fire blight, but rarely does any monster get access to 3, with the common exceptions being 1 or 2 small examples like Congalala and Gravios, and some Elder Dragons. However, Frontier grants us a few examples of monsters being able to utilize more status effects than is considered normal. The most notable member of this group being a monster already talked about today, the Forokururu. Espinas is also a good example, being able to inflict both fire blight and poison with his fire, as well as some attacks inflicting paralysis. Another example of one of these monsters is another monster the ancient civilization may have recruited to join the constructs, the Hujikiki. The Guardian Hujikiki bears resemblance to the monsters such as Barioth and Nagakuga, however it has the unique ability to grow spines all over its body due to a reaction between fats and oils stored in its body with the hair of the Guardian Hujikiki, which hardens them into razor-sharp, launchable spears. It can use these spines in a large variety of ways, either as melee weaponry to protect itself against predators larger than it, or launching itself at you, back first, in an attempt to turn you into a kebab. He can also use them at range, either spinning its body or flailing its tail. However, its accuracy on an initial inspection leave a bit to be desired. In actual fact, he bears more of a likeness to Barioth than Nagakuga, as he shares the ability to fire cyclones of wind from his mouth, that which the spines will circulate and fire out like bullets at prey. The Guardian Hujikiki is scarily intelligent with this too, as it will launch spines in specific spots in order to box prey into a corner or exactly where it wants them before striking the final blow. If desperate for a bit of space, he can launch spines into small areas in front of hunters, that which cause damage if stepped on, deterring combat or separating hunters from one another. The Guardian Hujikiki's selling point, however, would be its ability to use specialized organs in its body to produce toxins capable of poison, sleep, and paralysis, that which it will lace the spines with to add another dangerous level to its arsenal. These spines, when laced with these toxins, will combine with the volatility of the wilk stored within them to make almost miniature bombs, launching them at prey before detonating in a small area and creating a small cloud of gas, that which lingers for a few seconds, inflicting anything that wanders into it with the respective status. Hunters hoping to hard counter a Guardian Hujikiki may end up being a jack of all trades, but a master of none, as those spreading out resistances may fall victim sooner or later, and those prioritizing one may end up being on the receiving end of a different status altogether. However, the tables can be turned, and it is highly recommended that due to the spines being formed from hair and oil, fire is the optimum choice. Just as status can giveth, status can also taketh away. Elder Dragons in Monster Hunter are vastly more powerful than normal monsters, and so hold properties that massively overhaul their fighting ability to an enormous degree. They range from fire griffins that can form a bond so powerful it can be likened to a nuclear blast, beasts that only satiate themselves on the most powerful of Elder Dragons, a harbinger of frenzy and light, world serpents, walking volcanoes, the storm incarnate, and a dragon so powerful and malevolent it melts down its fallen victims and wears them like armor. Only the fiercest and bravest of hunters dare to put themselves up against an Elder Dragon. However, for whatever reason, the Forbidden Lands lacks any of these threats altogether. With the half exception of Gormagala as Demi-Elder and the recently discovered Gogmazios, there weren't any. Tashin, however, believes there may be something of Elder Dragon tier telekinesis dwelling in the ruins. On different expeditions, never has the landscape been the same twice. Where there was once relics of machinery and rock lies an empty path, with said machinery being found further down the road. Nothing in the ruins, nor the Forbidden Lands at the moment, is either powerful nor intelligent enough to move these things physically, suggesting some other means. Upon researching, these bits of metal moved seemingly on their own, with the dispatched hunters doing the same. Drawn in by some external force, the monster responsible wasn't using telekinesis as was thought, but instead magnetism, a monster later found out to be the Ruko Diora. The Rucodiora is an elder dragon that possesses extraordinary magnetic abilities, ripping chunks of rock and metal to use as weapons, that which will rarely run in short supply due to the ruins of Wyveria once belonging to a civilization of extremely technological advanced people. It is able to use the electricity its body produces to amplify the dragon element he possesses to even further increase its power when required, that which is so powerful it can use it to nearly entirely ignore paralysis, continuing to move and damage foes when inflicted. It can shoot out scales from its wings, that which are magnetically charged so that anything hit with one of these scales becomes subject to the Rucodiora's will. Hunters wishing to fight the Rucodiora should either avoid these scales at all costs or wear some armor and wield a weapon that can counter the Rucodiora. Not in terms of skill or element, but in terms of what it is made of. The Rucodiora is such an incredibly intelligent being that if anything surrounding it is afflicted with the electricity of these scales, it can manipulate it fully, meaning that if a hunter is partnered with another hunter who wears armor or wields a weapon with magnetized metal, then the Rucodiora can command this hunter. If this is the case, then the hunter not afflicted must damage the Rucodiora enough to break its command of the other hunter, allowing normal hunting to resume. Not only this, but it can also push and pull afflicted hunters at will. It can slow down weapon swings by pushing against its momentum. It can even pin down singular hunters to slow down the iron in the blood and reduce health, or rip up ballista to use against hunters. However, due to the dilapidated state of the ruins, this would more likely just be another piece of metal to be thrown at prey. Rucodiora, as an elder dragon with access to a status not yet seen to most hunters, would almost certainly pose a humongous threat, especially in times like these where armor, weapons, barrel bombs, fortifications, tools, smithing stations, camps, near everything is made of metal. It could even bring the end of the guild's presence in the Forbidden Lands if left unchecked. Even worse, if it gains access to Sild, the Keeper's village, then it could be the Wyverians that inadvertently destroy another civilization. Already have I pitched the idea of Guardians taking on separate roles within a combat environment. For example, Guardian Doshiguma being a tank, Guardian Rathalos being ranged, and Guardian Ebony and GFA being DPS. However, there is no Guardian that can play more than one role at once. The Zuwu is a monster that preys upon the Guardians, and therefore has earned the title of Apex. And this title of Apex has been well protected within the Forbidden Lands. The Apexes maintain control well, including fighting off latecomers that threaten their position, such as the Raidal blasting the Seregios, and Uthduna defeating Mizitsune, and specifically on land repelling a Lagiacris. The only exceptions being Golmazios, whom New Udra has no interaction, and Omega Planetes, an interdimensional being designed for cross-dimensional travel with self-evolving, repairing and reconfiguring capabilities, literally built for fighting the strongest beings possible. Therefore, Jin would naturally have a bit more trouble. Revolving back to the ruins though, another member of the family previously discussed could potentially fill multiple of these Guardian roles at once, and could threaten to once and for all dethrone the Zuwu, a monster whose ability to manipulate and transform its own anatomy can always present it with an advantage to battle: the Miru. The Miru is a close relative of the Dia Rakusu and has brilliantly adapted itself to the ruins. It is a monster that researchers believe was initially a Guardian Tigrex, however massively overhauled with abilities from the base, Brute, Molten and Grimclaw, only due to the vast and deadly arsenal it boasts. This, however, has since been disproven, and it is now known that this monster is just incredibly intelligent, capable of switching between multiple different forms to counter seemingly every monster it will come up against in the ruins. It will start off in its base form, fighting very similarly to another frontier monster and member of the Rex family, the Juragawa, however using fire elements. When enraged, he will go into what is known as the crystal form, where crystals on its head and arms will grow, similar to the base form, but obviously much more dangerous. When adapting to face the likes of tempered monsters, he will go into his ranged form, where his crystals will grow slightly and will fire off flames as projectiles, useful against tempered monsters since Nersilla, Lalabarina, Doshiguma and Gypsaros all have a weakness to fire. He can adapt into a quicker, sleeker speed form where his crystals turn a slight blue and bend backwards to aid in aerodynamics. Here he chooses to pounce at great velocities, making tons of lesser hard-hitting swipes, but they all add up eventually. When faced the opposite way around, specifically against DPS like the Guardian Ebony and GFA, he will engage his power form, where he will expand his muscle mass and glow a crimson red, sacrificing speed for an astounding level of strength, designed either to seriously injure or straight up kill enemies in a single blow. If If all else fails, then he will enter a hidden sixth form. In this state, he merges all other forms into one spectacular masterpiece, utilizing all of the abilities and powers at once, although not as concentrated. Whilst this hasn't been documented to be a last resort form, the Miru of the ruins will cycle through all other forms before reaching this one, and it normally makes an appearance towards the latter half of the battle. With the Miru having the ability to switch these forms at its own will, one could assume that given enough presence within the ruins, it could potentially gain enough strength to hard counter every single monster that also calls this place home. Whilst the Zuwu is a highly adapted creature capable of a huge amount of offensive threat, one wrong move or a fight against the wrong form of Miru could potentially spell the end for both its life and its time on the throne. The ancient civilization of Wyveria were a technologically advanced people who artificially created the monsters we now know as Guardians. These monsters were constructs whose purpose was to serve the civilization and protect it from any potential threats, hence the name Guardian. However, not all creations of Wyveria were public. It was to be assumed that with the presence of Guardians in Wyveria that the people were to be aware of the procedures ongoing, not to the point that construction protocols were basic common knowledge, but that most Wyverians would have had knowledge that the construction of the Guardians was happening. However, as always happens with power, some let it get the better of them. Some choose to abuse it, using it for what they think is a greater purpose, but in the long run causing a lot more harm than help. One such Wyverian scientist did exactly this, choosing to bypass any approval board or government authorization and set his sights on creating a beast of pure power, the ultimate Guardian. Two of the most common, well-adapted, ecologically successful and most feared monsters in the whole of the Monster Hunter universe is the Rathian and the Rathalos. Present in every region, apex of most fiercely deadly in all. This scientist decided to merge these two beings into one. The extreme, unrelenting aerial prowess of the Rathalos, the ground-based bludgeoning style of the Rathian, but nonetheless the extreme aggression and sheer strength of both. But life will always find a way. It happened with Arkveld, and such is the case happening here too. During experimental transfusion to power the Flying Wyvern with Elder Dragon tier power, a special, unprecedented genetic mutation within the monster caused it to amplify its programming, becoming extremely aggressive at anything it sees as a threat, but amplified 1,000-fold. Instead of taking on a white appearance, it turned jet black, with crimson red spikes protruding from every orifice, and mutated past the point of redemption. The beast escaped the lab, destroyed everything in its path, and fled into the horizon. Some have reported spotting the beast in regions surrounding Mesoporta Square, where they have called it unknown, and theorized that either its mutation or misadministered DNA has transcended the Elder Dragon title to instead give it the latent power of a black dragon instead. However, centuries later, the beast resides in the Forbidden Lands, normally self-exiled in solitude, but when sightings occur of it in battle, the beast will obliterate everything in its path, leaving neither an opponent nor any of the environment standing, and so has been dubbed by the guild the Disaster Rathian. There is very little, if anything, known about this monster. All that is known is that it is a resentful demon, getting angrier and angrier as it fights and never calming down once either its prey is dead or it is. The Disaster Rathian has such a massive and diverse moveset. It is unclear as to whether it was actually the base Wraths that went into the making of this thing, as it could as easily been the Dreads or the Metallics based on the sheer power and prowess this monster possesses. Its wings can create shockwaves big enough to send herds of herbivores flying. Its roar is strong enough to stun anything unfortunate enough to hear it. Fireballs as hot as miniature suns tearing through anything in its way. Spines from its back and tail laced with its signature poison get fired out, razor-sharp talons ripping up the ground from underneath it, all of which only get faster and faster, stronger and stronger as the fight progresses. It traditionally has never made anywhere its home, as most will class it as an invader. It will venture from locale to locale in search of anything as food, with nothing really having the power to stop it. Hunting parties out in the plains hunting Doshiguma packs have been forced away by the Disaster Rathian, hailing them with fireballs. Hunters in the basin have retreated due to the Disaster Rathian setting the place ablaze, almost creating a monster-made fire spring. The keepers of Sild feared for their lives when seeing the Disaster Rathian feed on a freshly hatched Guardian, and then pummeling an Arkveld as if it was nothing. Only the highest ranked hunters are given special permission from Fabius himself to hunt this beast wherever it shows up. Its unbridled rage and seething hatred towards seemingly everything makes it a priority kill-on-sight hunt. Not yet has the Forbidden Lands seen a monster with fully capable and mastered black dragon potential. However, if left unchecked for too long, it may be the case that the Disaster Rathian uncovers its true hidden potential and lives up to its namesake, spelling disaster for the Forbidden Lands in its entirety. Ruins of Wyveria is a vast, ruined kingdom that once belonged to the people of Wyveria. A story that, whilst not told the exact same way every time, has at least the same foundation, and so is widely known by almost every single person within the Forbidden Lands. The people of Sild, however, take the stories and mythology of the civilization a bit more serious. Being descendants of the cursed Wyverians, they are perhaps the most reliable source of information, having remained in the ruins to take care of the place, keeping tabs on the Guardians and tending to the wildlife, feeling themselves responsible for the transgressions of the past. However, hunters exclusively know the ruins to be mostly underground, with only a small bit of sunshine peering in through unreachable gaps above. Looking at more detailed guild images of the ruins, there exists more than meets the eye. A large towering building can be seen in the centre of the locale, that which has been rendered unrecognizable due to thousands of years of neglect. It deeply ties into another one of the Keeper's prophecies, however. Tashin tells a story not often told by the Keepers, of a monster said to reside at the peak of this cathedral. The occasional roar can be heard, and shadows dance around in the early hours of the day every few months. The prophecy tells of a guardian, similar to the Zoshia, keeping an eye on Wyveria, however from above as opposed to from below. He shows a stone tapestry, with the monster sat around a group of worshipping Wyverians, and the words Guardian of written underneath. A second line can also be faintly seen, however too scrubbed out to be read fully. The Avis unit would feel a faint rumbling, then a roar, too soon after the last to mean anything good. Alma shares information that could evidence this sudden activity, stating that it could either be mating season or the monster is just hungry, which would explain the sudden erratic movements and obvious agitation. But there would be one thing wrong with this theory. The Guardians don't need to mate or eat, and with one more almighty roar and a sudden shockwave of wind and ice, it is discovered that this monster isn't a construct Guardian at all. It was all just a nickname, the Guardian of the Sky Corridor, as the Dura Madeira, Emperor of Venomous Ice, appears. The Dura Madeira is a monster that was long left unclassified. However, research from other regions of the old world describe it as an elder dragon. It resides exclusively in the massive derelict castle within the center of the ruins, where it will only come out to hunt before dragging its deceased prey back into its nest to feed in private. When hunters come to visit the Dura Madeira for battle, the highest floor of the castle, that which I will continue to call the Sky Corridor for continuity's sake, is encased with ice, potentially showcasing decades of this monster being present. Over the course of the first phase of Dura Madeira's fights, it will use exclusively ice as a weapon, sprouting frozen pillars out of the ground, firing dozens and dozens of tiny shards of ice as a Gatling gun, breathe out powerful beams of frozen wind, and either cover itself in ice before dive bombing the hunter, or encasing the whole room in ice, much like the beginning, shattering it with just a single slam. As this happens, the ceiling and walls of the Sky Corridor begin to slightly deteriorate, sunlight poking through, and eventually the full view of the Forbidden Lands becomes visible. When it feels especially angry, it will initiate its second phase, where it will begin to implement a much more potent poison than most are used to. Named Corrupted Poison, this status not only saps the life out of hunters as per normal, but will also decrease defenses, and due to the Dura Madeira implementing this corrupted poison into all of its ice, it is very unlikely that hunters leave the place unscathed. Its pillars of ice, much like its body, glow a slight purple due to the poison, its shards of ice now imbued, its beam of frozen wind now venomous, its ball of ice now exploding corrupted poison arena-wide. It will even leave small puddles of this toxin on the floor, that which will uproot frozen spikes after a short period. Upon defeating the Dura Madeira, it will fall to the floor, any ice on the ceiling or walls melting away before the hunters get a brief moment of respite. Brief, as after a while to enjoy the view, hunters' visions get blurred, then completely covered by red ice, as the Dura Madeira has one more trick up its sleeve. It refreezes the surroundings before dropping back in from a humongous venomous ice ball. Its ice armor on its head, arms, wings, and tail grown, tinted with a poisonous red all over its scales. This is the Dura Madeira's last resort, its speed quicker, its frozen beams larger, its claw slams are followed up by spin attacks, puddles replaced by a series of massive toxic spikes, all of these chained in from one another, all whilst you bleed corrupted poison, and the Dura Madeira continues to try and crush you beneath its boots. But those that can hold out, those that can brave the Guardian of the Sky Corridor and come out on top, are granted with what is very likely the best reward in the whole game. Taken away for a third phase, hunters now get to look out properly of the broken walls of the derelict peak, and look over the entirety of not only the Forbidden Lands, but of half the old world, as those that reside in it continue to live and prosper, all thanks to our efforts as hunters. Gogmazios, as of right now, is the largest fight we have in Monster Hunter Wilds, with its sheer size requiring a whole new arena of the Oilwell Basin to be discovered. However, he isn't the largest of the old world. Zora Magdaros, the Migrating Elder, isn't the largest. The Dalamadur, the World Serpent, potential to be the skeleton in the Grand Hub, isn't the largest. The largest monster of all of Monster Hunter has been beneath our feet the whole time. In an unexpected series of events, the Kunafans, Woodwards, Azuz Tribe and Road report unnatural goings-on in the locales all at once. The sand tide striking the plains whilst the downpour simultaneously batters the forest, or whilst the fire spring occurs on its own and the frost wind biting far colder than normal, and all at the same time. The guild investigates and discovered that this wasn't the doing of another Zoshir awakening. This wasn't the doing of another Guardian running rampant. It wasn't anything to do with the Landspine or Wilk or anything previously dealt with. This was coming from deep underground. Earthquakes occurring much more regularly than normal, inclemencies lasting much longer than normal, all tied together with a deep rumbling from below the ground, and so down the guild went, following the Landspine deeper than anyone had done before. A humongous gluttonous monster was found, that which needed to be slain before it properly wakes up, as previous documentation of this monster doing so resulted in the entire island it called home disappearing off the face of the earth. If left alone to rouse from slumber on its own, it would create pure chaos simply by moving, then devouring the whole of the Forbidden Lands as an appetizer before the starter elsewhere, the Laviente. The Laviente would more than likely, if introduced, include a large mix of several different already existing monsters, fought underground, deep in the core of the earth in an arena similar to its Berserk variant, the core fighting mechanics of the Dalamadur, and with the siege aspect of Sappy Jiva, with multiple hunting groups all fighting the same monster in separate instances. However, if done right, could be one of the best siege fights the Forbidden Lands could offer. The Laviente can uproot massive rocks from its tusks to hurl at hunters, breathe out devastating beams of fire, send out paralyzing shocks, all whilst shaping the world surrounding it to its advantage, creating geysers of hot steam, that which hunters can turn on the Laviente if shot with a fire pod in a similar manner to Gogmazios, continuously stunning hunters with tremors by digging, causing stalactites to fall from the roof, all of which whilst the Laviente itself will attack. Its constant moving gradually results in the arena being transformed from a large cabin into a magma-filled hellscape, lava erupting from all over, replacing the hot gas geysers, leaking in from the walls, creating lakes on the floor and making the fight a whole lot more of a spectacle. Hunters that wish to deal with the Laviente will have to manipulate it into either tiring out or creating rocky ramps for them through uprooting rocks to throw. In either case, they can then jump on the back of the Laviente and traverse it like the Dalamadur, destroying the crystalline structures found along its body. Destroying these will initiate prolonged knockdowns, allowing hunting parties to deal incredible amounts of damage. However, if hunters get careless, they could be swept up by a tail attack, launched thousands of feet into the air as the Laviente arises from below to devour you whole. The cabin in which you fight Laviente is deep below the surface. However, due to it being near the land spine, there are plenty of Wilk pools nearby to use as an advantage. Any melee attacks of the Laviente can uproot incredibly large rocks of Wilk, that which can be detonated with various slinger ammo found scattered about, dealing massive damage. And perhaps a circumstance where Werner and the guild hand deliver a reverse-engineered yet vastly improved upon Convergent Elderbreaker, that which when hooked up to the land spine itself can cause some serious harm to the Laviente. The Forbidden Lands as a whole would be under the relentless mercy of the Laviente, as if it wishes to, it need only shiver to cause avalanches, eruptions, floods. If it awakens and is allowed to feed on the locales, the Dragon Torch and the Landspine, then hunters are too late to save the world, as there is likely no longer a world to save. And once again, there we have it. 55 pages, 21,000 words, and 28 frontier monsters I think could make their debuts in Monster Hunter Wilds DLC, Ascendance. There are around 90 or so monsters in the frontier category, and I very foolishly thought that this would be a simple task of narrowing that number down to 28, but researching, scripting, and watching footage of each of these monsters, it was far more Herculean than I ever thought it would be. Plenty of deserving monsters may have missed out on a spot, just as easily as I can say the monsters like Araganasu and Goroganasu are too cartoonish or Shantien is too over the top, batshit insanely powerful to make any sense in the Forbidden Lands. I could have also said that the Obidatarasu goes into the plains and Midogron into the basin, for example. So if you would like me to make a part 2 detailing another set of frontier monsters, then please do let me know. Just to remind you of disclaimers, this is what I think is my best. I haven't played Frontier in any capacity, so I am by no means qualified to talk this much about it in such detail as I have. However, I believe that theorizing and talking about it at least raises some awareness of our love for these kinds of monsters, and and together we can not only help keep that foot in the door, but break that bitch down, and open the floodgates for Frontier to enter the main line of games. Again, if anything is proven, disproven, retconned, false, or made up, then please don't immediately go hostile. Let me know and we can have discussions in the comments below, and whilst you're there, let me know which Frontier monsters you'd like to see return. As a final disclaimer, this outro is the only part of the video scripted and recorded after the Monster Hunter Wilds expansion, Ascendance, has been announced, which is why I don't make any reference to the Skybound area in any of the pics, and the same is to be said also in one of the next videos I have planned, assuming it gets released before any major trailers or announcements happen. This series of videos that has somehow found their way into being my niche, there's been the most amount of pleasure to make, and I hope the amount of passion put into them is reciprocated in the watch. If that's the case, then please do consider hitting that subscribe button, and if this niche is something you're interested in, I'll link the precursor to this video as well as the 2 Wilds wish lists I made below. If you like this video, I'm almost certain you'll like those, and if necessary, I'll look further into the rabbit hole and look through the monsters exclusive to online and explore, doing another list for those. Before I finish this humongous outro, I would like to throw out a few thank yous. First of all to CR Volcanic, whose in-depth descriptions of each monster allowed me to form a sort of database on each monster, its blights, ailments, which locale I think was likely for them, in a few notes. A thank you to Jeremiah V10, the elusive one, and anyone else responsible for the revamped icons of all the Frontier monsters on fanom.mhfandom.com. Anyone responsible for the very well worded, very well put together wiki entries for each of the monsters, and most of all to you, as I most likely would not be sat here speaking to myself for what is probably an hour and a half to 2 hours at this point if these sorts of videos didn't receive the praise and feedback they have been recently. And so here once again is to Monster Hunter Wilds Ascendance. I've got a few videos in the pipeline I was hoping to get sorted prior to the Summer Games Fest trailer coming out, but I for one am desperately excited to see the new Bird Wyvern and Lao Shen Lung, and to see what else it brings. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again. Bye bye.